She was left to die in the sun, with a secret burned into her skin, a secret that could destroy the most powerful man in Lincoln County. He was a broken soldier who had sworn never to look the other way again. When their worlds collided on that empty prairie, neither of them knew that what he saw in those first terrible seconds would cost them everything and give them back something neither had dared to want. Stay close. This one will stay with you long after the last word. Like and subscribe so you never miss the next ride, and drop a comment telling me what time it is, where you are, and what you are listening to this story with. Your story matters too. He saw the brand they burned into her skin, and he couldn't ride away. SG 58, Enhanced New Mexico Territory, September 1883. The sun came up mean that morning. It did not ease itself over the horizon the way it sometimes did in September, trailing gold and a hint of cooler air behind it like a man who knew he was welcome. It simply arrived hard and white, and without apology, burning away the last of the night, as if the night had been a personal insult. By the time the jackrabbits had retreated to their burrows and the hawks had stopped riding the thermals and gone wherever hawks went, when the heat got serious, the Lincoln Prairie was empty of everything except dust, silence, and Eleanor Cross. And the wooden frame she was tied to. They had built it from fence posts, 2 uprights, 1 cross piece, rough-cut timber that still smelled of sap and pine resin. Someone had put real craftsmanship into the knots. Not the fast, careless kind a man throws when he is in a hurry or angry. These were deliberate knots, the kind that tighten with struggle, that punish effort, that had been tied by someone who had done this before and had learned from experience exactly how much rope to use and exactly where to place it for maximum helplessness. Ellie had learned this the hard way over the past 2 hours. Her wrists were bound together above her head, lashed to the crosspiece so that her feet barely touched the ground. Her left ankle had been pulled up and tied separately, stretching her in a way that made every muscle in her side burn with a dull, continuous fire. Her dress had torn at the hem during the initial struggle. She had fought them. God help her. She had fought them hard, and the fabric had ridden up in a way that filled her with a hot shame that had nothing to do with the temperature. She had tried to pull the dress down with her bound hands. She could not quite reach. She had stopped trying after the first hour. It hurt too much and it did not help. What she focused on instead was breathing. Just breathing. The air tasted of dust and dry grass and something faintly metallic like the inside of a gun barrel, and it burned going down, but it was air, and it was keeping her alive, and that was the only thing that mattered right now. Keep breathing, she told herself. Keep thinking. The world is not made entirely of Harlan Voss. Somewhere in the distance, 3 miles, maybe 4, the roof lines of Lincoln shimmered in the heat haze like something half imagined. She could not see individual buildings from here, could not see the mercantile or the hotel or the sheriff's office with its peeling paint and its conveniently selective blindness. She could only see the general shape of the town floating at the edge of visibility like a fever dream. The sheriff's office. She almost laughed. Randall Pope had been eating supper at Voss's table every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 3 years. She knew this because she had kept the accounts for the Voss household briefly 18 months ago, before she understood what kind of household it was. Before she understood that the numbers in the ledgers were not just numbers, but stories, stolen cattle, and forged brands and land deeds that had been signed by men who had not known what they were signing. Before she understood that her husband had died for knowing the same thing. She closed her eyes against the glare and tried not to think about Aaron. She usually managed not to think about Aaron during the daylight hours. Nights were harder. Nights she would find herself listening to the silence where his breathing used to be, and she would have to get up and walk around the small rooms of the station house and remind herself of practical things the horses needed. Feeding, the accounts needed, updating the roof over the east stall had developed a worrying sag that she really ought to have a man look at. Practical things, the kind of things that had kept her going for 3 years. During the day, she was Eleanor Cross, widow proprietor of the Cross Station House, a woman of businesslike habits and careful silences. During the night, she was just a woman who had lost her husband and did not yet know how to forgive herself for still being alive. She had not planned to look at the cattle. It had been pure chance she had been up before dawn to check on one of the mares who had been favoring her left foreleg, and the lamp she carried had caught the movement in the east pasture. Dark shapes moving in the gray pre-dawn. She had thought at first that it was her own horses somehow out of their stalls, and she had gone to the fence to look. They were not her horses. They were cattle 30, maybe 40 head, being driven fast and quiet across the back of her land by men who rode low in the saddle and did not speak above a murmur. She had seen cattle drives before, had watched them pass through the valley a dozen times. But she had also kept the accounts long enough to know what a brand looked like and what it looked like when a brand had been altered, and in the lamplight, when two of the cattle passed close enough for her to see, she had seen it clearly, the original marks. And over them burned fresh and raw Voss's mark. She should have gone back inside. She should have set down the lamp, walked back to the barn, checked on the mare, and decided that she had seen nothing but shadows. She had been telling herself that for 3 years that she had seen nothing, that Aaron's death had been an accident, that the numbers in the ledgers were simply bookkeeping errors and nothing more. She was good at telling herself useful things. But one of Voss's men had seen her standing at the fence with the lamp, and 48 hours later, here she was. She had been here since before sunrise. It was now she tried to estimate from the sun's position past the middle of the morning. The temperature was still climbing. She had stopped sweating an hour ago, which she knew was not a good sign. Her mouth felt like old leather. The back of her neck, where the sun hit it directly, had moved past burning into a kind of numb wrongness that she suspected was something serious. She had screamed twice in the first hour when she still had enough voice and enough hope to think screaming might accomplish something. The prairie had swallowed both screams without comment. She was reduced to whispering now, just the one word repeated at intervals into the empty air. Not because she believed anyone would hear it, but because stopping felt like admitting something she was not ready to admit. "Help," she whispered. "Help, help." The wind moved across the grass indifferent, and then she heard hoofbeats. Cole Whitaker had not intended to be on the Lincoln Prairie that morning. He had intended to be in Santa Fe, where he had a meeting with a land agent about a small parcel of grazing land that he had been saving toward for the better part of 2 years. After Santa Fe, he had intended to ride north to Colorado, where a man he had served with in the war had a ranch and had been writing him letters with increasing frequency about whether Cole might consider coming to work for him. Cole had not made up his mind about the ranch. He was not sure he was ready to be anywhere in particular yet. That was how he had been living for the past 3 years, not anywhere in particular. After the war, he had tried a few times to put down roots, a brief stint as a deputy in a Texas border town, a season working cattle up into Kansas, 6 months working security for a mining company in Arizona, before the company's methods of dealing with labor disputes became something he could no longer be part of. Each time he had left, he had told himself he was simply not ready, that the right place would announce itself when he found it. He was 41 years old, and he was beginning to suspect that the right place was not going to announce itself, that this was simply who he was, a man who rode through, who helped when helping was possible, who moved on before he could want anything badly enough to be hurt by losing it. He was thinking about none of this when he saw the figure on the wooden frame. He had almost missed her. The glare was brutal, and his eyes were on the trail ahead, and the frame was set back from the path by 30 yards, positioned in a shallow depression between two rises that hid it from the road until you were nearly past it. It was only because his horse, a graying roan named August, had turned her head sharply to the left and flicked her ears forward that he had looked. He pulled up. For a moment, he simply sat in the saddle and looked, because what he was seeing did not immediately make sense to him. The frame, the ropes, the figure suspended from the crosspiece with her face turned away from him. His mind worked through the information, slowly unwilling to arrive at the obvious conclusion. Then he saw the dress. He was already swinging down from the saddle as the shame hit him. The quick, hot recognition that he was staring at something he had no right to look at. That the woman's clothing had been disarrayed in a way that was not an accident, that whatever had been done to her had included a deliberate humiliation alongside the physical restraint. He looked away fast. He looked at the ground for 2 full seconds, jaw tight, and then he looked back at her face, which was the only part of her he allowed himself to look at. Her face was turned toward him now, brown eyes fever bright, a smear of dried blood at her temple, lips cracked from the sun. She stared at him. He stared back. "Ma'am," he said. Her voice came out cracked and barely audible. "Don't look there." "I'm not," he said. "I'm looking at your face. Are you able to tell me if anything is broken?" She seemed to need a moment to process the question. "No," she said finally. "Nothing broken, I don't think." He nodded. He moved toward her carefully, the way you move toward an animal in pain. Slow, deliberate, no sudden gestures. He circled the frame first, checking the knots, reading them, the way a man reads sign on a trail. He had seen this kind of knot work before, years ago. Not here farther east in a different territory under the authority of a man whose orders he had followed for 14 months before he had finally understood what following those orders made him. He had left the next morning, left the uniform, the rank, the pension he was due, left everything except the ability to look at himself in a piece of glass without flinching. He was flinching now, but not at himself. "Who did this?" he asked. She did not answer immediately. Her eyes tracked him as he moved watchful, still not certain what kind of man he was. He understood that. He was still not certain himself. "Voss," she said finally, "Harlan Voss." The name meant nothing to him. He was not from here. He filed it away. "Why?" "Because I saw something I wasn't supposed to see." He came around to her front again and crouched slightly so their eyes were level. "How long have you been out here?" "Since before sunrise." Her voice was steadier now, as if the presence of another person, even an uncertain one, had given her something to anchor to. "That's too long in this heat." He straightened. "I'm going to get you down." "That all right?" Something moved across her face, not hope exactly, but its early warning signs. And then we figure out the rest," he said, "one thing at a time." He reached for the knife at his belt and stopped, because that was when he saw it. He had been looking at the ropes, the frame, the position of her arms, calculating angles and tension, in the best order of release. He had not looked below her knee. He looked now, just a glance, the professional assessment of a man taking inventory of damage, and he saw the mark on her inner thigh, just above where the hem of her torn dress had ridden up. Not a bruise, not a rope burn. A brand, recent, still showing the raw red-purple of tissue that had been burned within the past week. Done with a running iron, he judged the mark was too deliberate to be anything else. It had been pressed into her skin with care, with intention, with the specific malice of someone who wanted to make a point that would outlast any words. The brand was 2 letters, RB. Cole Whitaker stopped breathing. He stared at those 2 letters for long enough that Ellie noticed his stillness. "Don't look there," she said again, and her voice was different this time. Not the sharp, reflexive shame of before, but something quieter, defeated. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the brand, and in his chest something was happening that he could not immediately name. It was not pity. It was not anger, though anger was part of it. It was something older and more specific, something that had been sitting in him for 3 years, waiting for exactly this moment. RB. Robert Whitaker had used that brand on the small herd he had run in this territory. Cole had helped him design it 12 years ago, when Robert was 23 and full of plans and certain that New Mexico was going to make him rich. Cole had helped him file the brand with the territory office himself. He had been told Robert was dead. The letter had come to him in Arizona, forwarded 3 times before it found him, written in the hand of a local preacher who said that Robert Whitaker had been killed in a cattle raid and buried in the churchyard at Lincoln. Cole had received the letter 6 months after the fact. He had ridden to Lincoln, seen the grave, and ridden away again because there was nothing else to do. Robert was dead. And yet here was Robert's brand, burned fresh into living skin. Cole's knife came out, and he cut the rope at her wrists in one motion. She sagged, and he caught her around the shoulders, keeping his eyes on her face, only her face, and as he moved to cut the rope at her ankle, he spoke quietly. "That brand on your leg," he said. "The letters RB. Do you know whose it was?" Her breath hitched. "It was on some of the cattle," she said carefully. "The original brand before Voss's men burned over it." "Did they explain why they put it on you?" A pause. "Voss said they were marking me the same way they marked stolen property." Her voice was flat, factual, and the flatness of it hit Cole somewhere behind his sternum. "He said it would remind me to keep my mouth shut." The rope at her ankle came free, and Cole stood up with her one arm around her waist, and she let her weight come into him because there was no other option. Her legs had gone unreliable from the hours of suspension and the heat and whatever she had been through before this. "You said you saw something," Cole said. "What did you see?" She looked at him for a long moment, measuring. "Cattle with Voss's mark burned over Robert Whitaker's brand," she said. 40 head at least, being driven through my land before sunrise." Cole's jaw set. "And Whitaker's cattle. Do you know what happened in Osaya? Do you know what happened to the man?" "Died 3 years ago," she said. "Some kind of raid," the story went. "I never knew the details." Cole nodded once. He did not say what he was thinking. He was not ready to say it, and this was not the moment. This was the moment to get her somewhere safe before Voss's men came back, because men who did this kind of knot work always came back to check their work. He was moving her toward August when he heard the hoofbeats. 2 horses, fast, coming from the direction of Lincoln. She felt him stiffen before she heard them herself, and the quality of his stillness told her everything she needed to know about what was coming. Voss's men, she asked. Most likely. He was already angling them toward August, calculating distances and options with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this kind of calculation many times before. Can you hold yourself in the saddle if I boost you up? For how long? 60 seconds. I can try. He glanced at her dress, at the disarray of it, and something passed across his face, not the prurient embarrassment of the first look, but something more considered, more deliberate. He unhooked his coat from the saddle and held it out. Put this around your hips, he said. However you want to do that. I'll look the other way. She took the coat with both hands, shaking slightly, and managed to get it wrapped around herself in a way that felt like something close to dignity. It smelled of horse and tobacco and something underneath that was just him, old leather and wood smoke, and a faint trace of what might have been bay rum from some long ago morning when there had been time for such things. All right, she said. He looked back at her. His eyes went to her face and stayed there. The two riders crested the rise. Both of them were Voss's men. She recognized the one in front, a lean, rodent-featured man called Dix, who handled most of Voss's unpleasant errands and seemed to enjoy the work. The second man she did not know, but he had the broad, slack look of someone hired primarily for size. "Hail," Dix called out. Then he blinked and corrected himself, squinting. "Who are you?" "A man who doesn't like what he found," Cole said. His voice had gone very quiet, which she would learn later was what happened when he was genuinely dangerous. "This woman coming down was the right call. You want to argue about it, we can do that." Dick smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Boss said leave her till sundown. Your boss can revise his plans." Dick swung down from his saddle. His hand hovered near his gun. "Step away from her." Cole did not step away. What he did was move sudden and direct, the way old soldiers move when they have decided that talking is finished. His fist caught Dick's across the jaw with a crack that sounded wrong, too solid, and Dick staggered but did not go down. He came back swinging, and his knuckles caught Cole across the nose, splitting skin. The blood came immediately. Cole did not seem to notice. The second man was going for his gun. Cole grabbed his wrist. She saw the effort it cost him, saw the grimace, knew there was an old injury somewhere in that right shoulder, and they struggled for it, and then the man drove an elbow into Cole's ribs, and Cole's grip slipped, and the gun fell. It landed 2 feet from where she was standing. Ellie Cross had never fired a gun in her life. Her husband had owned one. She had held it twice. She had never once pointed it at anything living. She picked up the gun with both hands, and she pointed it at the sky because pointing it at a person was something she was not prepared to do, and she closed her eyes and pulled the trigger. The shot was enormous. The kick nearly knocked her over. When she opened her eyes, both men had gone very still, hands away from their belts, and she was standing in the center of a ringing silence with a smoking gun and a hammering heart. "Next one won't go in the air," she said. Her voice was shaking. She did not try to make it not shake. "Get back on your horses." They looked from her to Cole's bloody face and back again. They got back on their horses. They rode. Cole watched them go. Then he turned and looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. Something that might have been surprise or might have been the slow recognition of something he had not expected to find. "You've never done that before," he said. "Obviously," she said, and sat down on the ground because her legs had given out. He was beside her in 3 steps. He crouched down and looked at her face carefully, not checking for injury, exactly more the way you check to see if someone is still present, still in the room with you. She looked back at him and was surprised to find that she was not afraid of him. She should probably be afraid of him. She did not know him at all, but he had looked away. Both times she had told him he had looked away, and for a reason she could not quite put into words yet that had mattered more than anything else. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I'll fall off," she said. "I'll catch you," he said. He lifted her into August's saddle with a grunt that he tried and failed to disguise as something quieter, and then he swung up behind her, closed his arm firm around her waist, his chest against her back, and August leaped forward into the blazing morning. She tried to keep her eyes open as they rode. She genuinely tried. The last thing she felt before the darkness took her was the steady, reliable beat of his heart against her spine. He rode with her for 3 hours before he found the place he was looking for. August knew the hills, or she trusted the hills, which was close enough. Cole guided her off the main trail onto a deer path that wound east through scrub oak and pinyon, following the sound of water, until he found what he needed, a shallow draw above the Rio Bonito, where the stone overhang cut the direct sun and the creek ran cold and clear over flat rocks. He got Ellie down from the saddle without waking her, which took some doing, and laid her on the flattest piece of ground he could find with his bedroll under her head. She was burning up. The fever had come on fast, which meant she had been in the heat too long, and her body was doing what bodies did when they had been pushed past reasonable limits. He unsaddled August and watered her and hobbled her in the shade, then stripped off his shirt and tore it into strips. He soaked the strips in the creek. The water was cold enough to numb his hands in 60 seconds, and he laid them across Ellie's forehead, her neck, the backs of her hands. Then he sat back on his heels and looked at her in the fading light of late afternoon and let himself think about what he was actually doing. He was doing it because of the brand. He knew that. He would have helped her regardless. That much he believed about himself, but the brand had changed the stakes in a way that he could not ignore. Robert's brand, his brother's brand, burned into a woman's skin as a warning to keep silent about stolen cattle that had once belonged to Robert. 3 years ago, he had ridden to Lincoln and seen a grave and ridden away again. He had told himself there was nothing left to find. He had been wrong. The question now was not whether to pursue this, but how and with whom and what exactly he was going to find when he pulled on this particular thread. He had learned over the course of a life that had included 2 wars and more confrontations with human nature than any man would choose, that pulling on threads was rarely a simple operation. Things unraveled in unexpected directions. He was thinking about this when Ellie's hand moved. It went to her thigh, instinctive, protective. She said something that was not quite words, and her eyes moved under her closed lids, and then she said more clearly, "Don't look there." "I'm not," he said. She stilled. He went back to soaking strips of cloth in the creek and laying them where they would do the most good, and he did not look. Not at the brand, not at the disarray of her clothing, not at any of it. He looked at her face, the shape of her hands, the way her breathing gradually steadied as the fever began to come down. By the time the stars came out, she was sleeping rather than unconscious, which was different and better. He built a small fire, enough for warmth, but not enough to be seen from distance, and he made coffee in the battered tin pot from his saddlebag, and he sat with it and looked at the fire and thought about Robert. Robert, who had been 23 and full of plans. Robert, who had written him letters for years from New Mexico, cheerful, ambitious letters full of details about the land and the cattle and the particular quality of the light at certain times of day. Letters that had been less cheerful eventually, more guarded, and then for a period of about 8 months before the letter from the preacher, no letters at all. Cole had noticed the silence. He had told himself it was the distance, the unreliability of mail. Robert's well-known tendency to start projects with enthusiasm and then let correspondence fall behind as he got absorbed in the work. He had not ridden out to check. That was what he did not let himself think about usually. That he had not come when Robert went silent. That he had been busy with his own life, his own careful avoidance of roots, his own manageable grief at one remove. That a man he loved had needed him, and he had not known until it was too late. The fire crackled, and he threw another piece of wood on it and listened to the creak. From behind him, barely audible, Ellie's voice. "You're still here." He turned. She was lying with her eyes open, watching him from the bedroll. The fever had broken. Her forehead was damp but clear. "Still here," he said. "I thought I dreamed you," she said. "The whole thing." "No." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know your name." "Cole Whitaker." Something moved across her face. He watched it pass, unable to read it in the firelight. "Eleanor Cross," she said. "They call me Ellie." He nodded. He poured a second cup of coffee, just water, and grounds, not much more, but something warm, and carried it to her, and crouched down and held it out. She pushed herself up on one elbow to take it, and winced as her arms took her weight. "Careful," he said. "You've been tied for a long time." "I know." She took the cup, wrapped both hands around it. The fire threw a warm, unsteady light across her face, and for a moment she just held the cup without drinking, looking at something he could not see. Then she said, "Your brother, Robert Whitaker." He went very still. "My husband found him," she said, 3 years ago. "Rob." He was calling himself Rob. Just Rob, not Whitaker, came to our station with a ledger. Numbers that he said could prove Voss was running stolen cattle. My husband was a doctor. He sometimes also kept accounts for some of the ranchers. Rob thought he might know what to do with the information. She looked up at Cole. 3 days after Rob left our station, my husband died. They said it was a fall from a horse. Aaron hadn't fallen off a horse in 15 years. Cole's hands were very still in his lap. "And Rob," he said. "I don't know. He was already gone. After Aaron died, I was afraid to ask questions." She looked at the coffee, then back at him. I found something after, in Aaron's boot, a piece of paper. It said, if I die, find Whitaker. He knows. Cole closed his eyes. He kept them closed for a count of 5, and then he opened them. Robert didn't die in a raid, he said. It was not quite a question. I don't know, Ellie said. I only know what they told people, and I know that what they told people about Aaron wasn't true. The fire spoke quietly between them. Somewhere in the creek, a stone shifted, and the water changed pitch. What do you want to do with this? Cole said finally. Ellie looked at him for a long time. The coffee had gone cold in her hands. I have been frightened for 3 years, she said. I have kept a secret that cost my husband his life and nearly cost me mine. I have told myself every day that there was nothing I could do, that Voss was too powerful, that the law was in his pocket, that a widow running a stage stop was not a person whose word meant anything against a man who owned half the cattle in Lincoln County. She set the cup down carefully. I am done being frightened. Cole looked at her. All right, he said. Just like that. Something in her voice was almost disbelieving. You asked me a question. I answered it. He stood up, moved back to the fire. We're not going into Lincoln tomorrow. Not until you're strong enough to stand without holding on to something, and not until we know what we're riding into. But we're going. She looked at his back. She looked at the way he was standing, the slight forward cant of a man who had made a decision and was already organizing the steps that followed from it. Cole, she said. He turned. Thank you for looking away, she said. He was quiet for a moment. You're not what they were trying to make you, he said. When they tell you not to look, they're usually hiding something they can't afford to have seen. He turned back to the fire. Get some sleep. We'll have a lot to do tomorrow. She lay back on the bedroll and looked up at the stars through the gap in the stone overhang. And for the first time in 3 years, she did not feel entirely alone. Cole Whitaker had come from a place called Derry, Ohio, which was a town that smelled of river mud and wood smoke, and had produced in his time 3 Methodist preachers, 1 state legislator of moderate achievement, and a disproportionate number of men who had gone west and not come back. He had been 26 when he left for the war. He had been the kind of man who believed in things that in the country's argument with itself in the right side of history, and the notion that a uniform was a kind of moral statement. He had come back at 29, missing that specific quality of certainty, though not the capacity for belief itself. He had simply become more selective about what he believed in. The things he believed in now were smaller and more specific than before. He believed in paying debts. He believed in not walking past someone who needed help. He believed in the difference between a man who had done wrong and was trying to correct it, and a man who had done wrong and was committed to staying wrong, and he believed that responding to these 2 kinds of men the same way was a moral failure. He believed in horses. He had owned 7 horses in his adult life, and had liked all of them better than most of the humans he had encountered, with certain notable exceptions. August was the 6th he had had her for 4 years, and she had rewarded him with a steadiness that he had come to rely on in ways he did not like to examine too closely. He had 1 brother, 1 dead brother, or so he had thought. He did not think about Robert constantly, but he thought about him often, and the thoughts had a particular quality. They were not grief exactly, because grief has an outward movement, a reaching toward what was lost. His thoughts about Robert were more interior. They were about the shape of absence, the specific dimensions of a space that a person leaves when they are gone, and how that space does not go away, but changes over time in the way that a house changes after someone has moved out. The same rooms, a different quality of air. He had been in Arizona when the preacher's letter caught up to him, 3 times forwarded smelling of the road. He had sat with it for 2 days before he rode to Lincoln. He had walked through the churchyard and found the marker plain wood, Robert's name, the year, and he had stood in front of it for a long time without being able to find the right thing to feel. He had ridden away. He told himself it was because there was nothing to do. He was beginning to suspect it was because there was something to do, and he had not been ready to do it. The rider he was, now 41, on a horse named August, heading nowhere particular, on a road that ran east toward a meeting he was no longer sure he wanted, was not so different from the man who had stood at the grave. But something had been building in him for 3 years, some slow accumulation of unfinished business, and when August had turned her head and flicked her ears, and he had looked left and seen the wooden frame against the white sky, he had stopped. The second full day at the draw, Ellie woke to find Cole already gone from the camp. She sat up carefully, taking inventory of herself the way she had been doing since the frame legs functional, still stiff from the suspension, The brand on her inner thigh sore with the particular deep bone ache of healing tissue. Arms better, the circulation fully returned. Head clear. She was better. She was not yet well, but she was definitively better, and the difference felt significant. She found Cole downstream where the creek widened slightly over a flat shelf of stone. He was kneeling at the water's edge, doing nothing that she could identify, just looking at the water. She came and stood beside him. He glanced up, then back at the water. "There's a fish," he said. She looked. There was indeed a fish. A brown trout, she thought, though she was no expert, holding in the current behind a half-submerged rock with the complete stillness of a creature that had mastered the art of being where it was. "He's been there for 20 minutes, Cole said. "Do you want to catch him?" "I don't have any line." "Do you want to try anyway?" He considered this seriously. "No," he said finally. "I like watching him." She crouched beside him. The creek smelled of cold rock and wet soil, and the particular mineral sharpness of moving water in a dry country. The trout hung in the current, barely moving perfectly where it was. "My husband used to do this," she said. "Just stop and look at things. A rock, a bird, a particular formation of cloud." He said looking was thinking for him, that he needed something to look at before he could sort his thoughts. She watched the fish. "I used to think it was a habit I would eventually acquire. I am beginning to suspect I am a different kind of thinker." "What kind?" Cole asked. "The kind that thinks while moving," she said. "Or talking sometimes. I can talk myself through something faster than I can sit with it." "You're not talking now." She considered this. "No," she said. "I suppose I'm not." The trout shifted slightly and the current made a small adjustment held. "I think I may be learning something from the fish." The corner of Cole's mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but in its direction. "What are you learning?" That being still was not the same as doing nothing. She looked at the fish. "That fish is working very hard. You can't see it, but he's working." Cole looked at her. "You should eat," he said. "I have jerky and some hardtack and a tin of peaches that I have been saving for a specific low point." "Has the low point arrived?" "I think the low point was the frame," he said. "We have progressed past it. The peaches are appropriate." He had a small fire going by the time she made her way back to the camp, and the tin of peaches was open on a flat rock, and the hardtack was laid out beside it. And it was not a meal by any reasonable standard, but the peaches were very sweet, and the morning was cooling toward a tolerable temperature, and the fire was just exactly the right size. She told him about the station while they ate. She had not planned to. It started with a practical matter, the question of what she had left undone when Voss's men took her, what she would need to attend to on her return. And then it kept going, became more than the inventory, became the story of how she and Aaron had built the place up from a falling down structure with one sound wall and a lot of ambition. The kitchen garden that had taken 3 years to get right. The east pasture she had fenced herself the first autumn because they couldn't afford the labor. The mare whose name was Patience and who had been acquired through a series of trades and negotiations that Ellie described with the enthusiasm of someone who still found the outcome improbable and pleasing. Cole listened to all of this. He listened the way she had noticed. He listened to everything, not waiting for his turn to speak, not preparing a response, but actually attending, following the shape of what she was telling him, with a quality of attention that she had encountered in only a few people in her life, and that she had until very recently associated primarily with Aaron. When she stopped, he did not immediately speak. "You built most of that yourself," he said finally. "Not a question." "Aaron and I built it," she said. "You built most of it," he said again, gently, "listening to you talk about it." She thought about this. "He was there," she said. "I know." He looked at the fire. "But the fencing was you, and the garden, and the horses." He looked at her. "I'm not diminishing him. I'm saying I can hear the shape of who did what when you talk about it, and that's something worth noticing." She was quiet for a moment. "I suppose that's true," she said. "He was better at the doctoring parts and the looking at things." She paused. "We were good at different things. That's what made it work. That's what makes most things work," Cole said. They looked at the fire for a while. "What are you good at?" she asked. He thought about it with the seriousness he brought to everything. "Assessing situations," he said, "knowing which problems are real and which are just noise." "Horses." He paused. "Structural things. Carpentry if there's something structural to think about." She said nothing, but she filed this away. The night before they rode into Lincoln, Ellie could not sleep. She lay on her side in the small room Gus had given her. Clean sheets, a window that looked east. A quilt that had been made by someone who loved the person they were making it for, the small stitches patient. And she listened to the ranch sleeping around her. Clara's breathing through the thin wall, a small snore, and then a shifting and then silence. The horses moving in the barn, the creek below the ridge too far to hear but present in some way she felt rather than heard. She was afraid. She knew she was afraid. Swung. The fear had been with her since before the frame, since the morning in the east pasture when she had seen the cattle and known she had seen something she was not meant to see. She had been afraid every day for 3 years, a background radiation of it, and the frame and everything after had not removed the fear but had done something else to it, had clarified it, had reduced it to something she could see the actual shape of, which was smaller than the shapeless version she had been living with. She was afraid of standing in front of people and speaking. She was afraid of Voss seeing her afraid. She was afraid of failing Aaron. Not just failing to bring Voss to account for what had happened, but failing the version of Aaron who had believed that truth was the thing you held on to when everything else was uncertain. She was not afraid of what would happen if she did not go. She had spent 3 years afraid of that, and that particular fear had been used against her like a weapon, had been the mechanism by which Voss had kept his secret, had been. She understood now the whole point of the frame. Not just to punish her, but to send her home afraid. To put the memory of the frame inside her fear and let the two of them work together in the dark for years. She was not going to let them do that. She got up. She put on her dress. Gus's wife had left things behind when she died, and Gus had quietly pointed Ellie toward a trunk in the spare room with the offer of whatever fit, and she had found a plain gray wool dress that was close enough, and she went out onto the porch. Cole was already there. He was sitting on this porch step with a cup of cold coffee and his hat in his hands, turning the brim slowly through his fingers. He looked up when she came out. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "No," he said. She sat beside him on the step. The night was cool and completely clear. The kind of New Mexico night that made the stars look close enough to touch, and the Milky Way was a band of spilled light from south to north overhead. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Of what?" He was quiet for a moment. "Of being too late," he said. "Of having done the wrong thing at the wrong time in the wrong order. Of standing up in that street and watching Voss walk away because we didn't quite get the sequence right." He turned the hat through his hands. "That is the thing that wakes me up. That we're close and it still doesn't work." "That's a practical fear," she said. "Yes, mine is more." She searched for the word "more personal." "I keep thinking about what it will feel like to be standing there in front of everyone, with everyone looking at me." She looked at the stars. "I have spent a long time being invisible, deliberately, staying quiet, staying small, not giving anyone a reason to look at me." She paused. "And I know that invisibility has been protecting Voss more than it has been protecting me. But there is still a part of me that is afraid of being seen." Cole was quiet. "Not by you," she said. "That's the strange part. I stopped being afraid of you looking at me very early, almost immediately after the frame." She considered this. "I think because you looked away when I asked you to. That told me something. Something about what kind of looking you were interested in." "The kind that doesn't take," Cole said. "Yes," she said, "exactly." They sat on the porch step in the starlight, and the night moved over them slowly, and somewhere far below the ranch, a coyote called and was answered and was quiet. "I was thinking," Cole said, "about what you said, about practicing what you're going to say, and it coming out either too angry or too small. I haven't found the right version yet." "I think you have," he said. "I think it's just that you haven't recognized it as the right version because you keep looking for something that sounds like what a brave person would say. And you're thinking the brave person is someone who isn't afraid." She looked at him. "Just say what's true," he said. "That's all. What happened and what it meant and what you saw. You've been saying it to me and to Gus and to Harriet Burke and every person at that kitchen table for the past week, and every time you've said it simply and directly without trying to make it more than it is. That's what it should sound like tomorrow." He looked at the stars. "The brave part isn't the words. The brave part is standing up to say them." She sat with this for a while. "Cole," she said. "Yes. I'm glad August stopped." He was quiet for a moment. "So am I," he said. She went back inside. She slept. They stayed in the draw above the Rio Bonito for 2 days. It was not how Cole had planned it. He had intended one day enough for Ellie to recover enough, to ride enough for him to think through the next move, enough for the immediate danger to settle into something he could see the shape of. But the first morning she tried to stand, Her legs went out from under her, and he caught her before she hit the ground, and she looked at him with an expression that he recognized as fury at her own body, and he told her they had time. And somehow he said it in a way that made it feel true instead of kind. On the second morning, she woke before him, which he noticed only when he heard her moving at the creek's edge. He lay still with his eyes open and looked at the stone ceiling of the overhang and listened to the water and the small, ordinary sounds of a person washing their face and beginning the process of returning to themselves. When she came back and sat down across the cold fire ring from him, she looked like herself in a way she had not managed yet. Her dress was still torn, and his coat was still doing service as a kind of improvised wrap around her hips. But her back was straight, and her eyes had cleared, and there was something in the set of her jaw that reminded him of certain people he had served with, the ones who had been genuinely terrified and had done the hard thing anyway. "Tell me about your brother," she said. He made coffee while he talked. He told her about Robert as a boy, the youngest by 6 years, the one who had always been moving, always planning, who had driven their mother to distraction with his certainty that whatever he was currently doing was the most important thing that had ever been done. He told her about the years after the war when he had lost track of Robert because he was busy losing himself, and about the letters when they finally resumed, the early ones cheerful, later ones subdued. He told her about the letter from the preacher, received 6 months too late, about writing to Lincoln, seeing the grave riding away. He told her because she had told him her hard thing, and it seemed right to tell her his, that he had not come when Robert went silent, that he had been occupied with his own careful life and had told himself the silence was nothing and had been wrong. Ellie listened to all of it without interrupting. When he stopped talking, she was quiet for a moment. "You didn't know," she said. "I should have checked." "You couldn't have known there was something to check on." "He went quiet for 8 months. People don't go quiet for 8 months for no reason." She looked at him steadily. "My husband knew something was wrong, and he didn't leave either. He stayed at the station and kept his head down and told himself it would be all right." Her voice was even factual. "He stayed because I asked him to stay, because I was afraid of what leaving might mean. He died 50 yards from our front door." She paused. "The things we don't do haunt us differently than the things we do, but they are still just the past. They are still already done." Cole looked at the coffee in his cup for a long moment. Then he looked up at her. "What was he like, your husband?" Something shifted in her face, not pain exactly, but the memory of pain, which is different and in some ways harder. "Patient," she said. "Careful, genuinely curious about everything. He could spend an hour talking about the properties of a particular riverstone." She almost smiled. "I used to pretend to be bored. I wasn't." "You miss him." "Every day." She looked at the fire ring. "But missing someone and being stuck are not the same thing. I didn't figure that out for a while." They broke camp after the coffee. Ellie moved carefully but steadily, and she did not ask for help except when it made practical sense. And the couple of times Cole offered anyway, she gave him a look that told him she had noticed and appreciated the offer and was turning it down on principle, not pride. He found that he respected this. He found that he respected quite a lot about her, which was more than he had expected from a woman he had known for 2 days. They needed more than the two of them. Cole knew this. The story they were carrying, stolen cattle forged brands, a dead doctor, a disappeared rancher, a brand burned into a woman's skin as a warning, was not a story you could walk into a town with and expect justice to follow automatically. Especially not in a county where the sheriff ate supper at the powerful man's table twice a week. They needed witnesses. They needed people with standing. They needed people who had been waiting for exactly this kind of proof and had not known it yet. He knew one such person. "Gus Reeves," he told Ellie as they rode. "Augustin Reeves. He runs a small spread about 8 miles east of Lincoln in the next valley over. Former federal soldier. He and I served together." Cole paused. "He owes me something, and I know he's been troubled by the situation here for years. He's never talked about it. But I've known Gus for a long time, and a man who is troubled but silent is not the same as a man who has nothing to say." Ellie was quiet for a moment behind him. "You trust him?" "Enough," Cole said, "for what we need." That was not quite honest, and he knew it. But some doubts were not the kind you expressed until you had to. Gus Reeves's ranch was weathered in the way that things weathered, honestly, not rotting, not falling apart, but carrying the visible record of time and work and repairs done when they needed doing and not before. There was a main house, a barn, a chicken coop that had seen better decades, and a kitchen garden that showed signs of serious tending. There was also a child. She was sitting on the front step when they rode in, 8 years old maybe, with Gus's dark eyes and someone else's general attitude of unassailable judgment. She looked at Cole, then at Ellie, then at the coat around the hips arrangement, then back at Cole. "You're late," she said to Cole. "I've never been here before," he said. "I know," she said. "You're still late." Gus appeared at the door behind her, older than Cole remembered, gray at the temples and heavy-set in the way of men who had once been built for physical work and had not stopped doing it, and looked at Cole and then at Ellie and then at the overall situation, and something in his face went very still and careful. "Come in," he said. He put the child, her name was Clara. She was his granddaughter. Her parents were both gone now in ways that Gus did not elaborate on and Cole did not ask about. He put Clara to work in the kitchen garden with instructions that he would call her for supper and that she was not to listen at windows, which instruction she received with the profound skepticism it deserved and probably ignored. Inside, he poured coffee without being asked and set it on the table and looked at Cole across it. "How bad?" he said. Cole told him. All of it, the frame, the Brandelli's account of the cattle drive, the ledger Robert had brought to Aaron Cross, the piece of paper in Aaron's boot. He told it plainly and in sequence, and he watched Gus's face while he talked. He had known Gus Reeves for 22 years. In that time, he had seen Gus angry, frightened, joyful, grief-stricken, drunk, and sober. He had never seen him look the way he looked now, which was the particular expression of a man watching something he has dreaded catch up to him. When Cole finished, Gus sat with his coffee for a long moment. "I know about Robert," he said. The room went quiet. Cole looked at him. "I have known for 9 years," Gus said. He said it to the table, not to Cole. "Voss had a man approach me after Robert started asking questions, before things went bad. The man told me that questions were being asked about Voss's cattle operation and that it would be wise for anyone who valued their ranch and their family's safety to stay out of it." He paused. "The man also said that if Robert Whitaker's cattle happened to disappear and Robert Whitaker happened to leave the territory or not, it would be best for everyone if no one asked too many questions." He looked up at Cole. "I didn't know Robert would die," he said. "I want you to understand that. I thought he would leave. I thought Voss would run him off the same way he runs off other people who get in the way. I didn't know he would die." He reached into his coat pocket and set a folded piece of paper on the table. "But I have known for a long time that he did die," Gus continued, "and I have kept this. I don't know what I thought I was going to do with it. Every year I thought next year, or when Clara is grown, or when the time is right. The time was never right." He looked at Cole steadily. "There is never a right time. There is just the time you pick." Cole looked at the paper on the table. He did not reach for it yet. He looked at Gus, the man he had trusted his life to more than once. The man who had carried this for 9 years, the man sitting across from him, with the expression of someone who has been waiting for a particular judgment and is not sure he can survive it. Cole reached out and picked up the paper. He unfolded it. He read what was on it. Voss's name, Robert's name, a date in 1874, and the name of the man Voss had used, a man Cole had never heard of, probably long gone from the territory or long dead. He folded it again. He put it in his breast pocket. He did not say anything. Gus exhaled a long, unsteady breath. Cole looked at him and felt the anger there, the old hot anger, and also something else underneath it. Something that was about grief more than judgment. He had missed Robert's dying. Gus had known about the circumstances of it and had carried that knowledge alone. Both of them had done the wrong thing, each in their own way, each for reasons that made a kind of terrible sense. "I need to know who else," Cole said. Gus nodded. He began to talk. By the end of that evening, there were 6 people around Gus's kitchen table. Gus had sent his neighbor's boy, a 14-year-old, who rode like he'd been born on a horse, to fetch the others, 2 former soldiers who had been ranching in the valley for years and had run-ins with Voss's methods of doing business, and a woman named Harriet Burke, who had been the territory's unofficial postmistress for 15 years and knew where every piece of paper in Lincoln County had gone and why. Harriet Burke was 71 years old and had the eyes of someone who had stopped being surprised by human behavior around the age of 40 and had been gathering data since. She looked at Ellie for a long time when they were introduced. "Aaron Cross's wife," she said. "Widow," Ellie said. "I know." Harriet's expression shifted slightly. "He was a good man. He deserved better than he got." "Yes," Ellie said. "So did a good many people in this county." Harriet set her bag on the table and opened it and began to remove papers, documents folded and labeled in a cramped, precise hand. I have been waiting for the right combination of circumstances and people with nothing left to lose. I believe we may have arrived. The documents Harriet Burke produced at Gus Reeves's kitchen table that night were extraordinary in the specific way that ordinary things become extraordinary when enough of them are put together in the right order. Land transfer records that showed how Voss had moved legal title to parcels of land from their original owners through a series of transactions so complex that the original owners had not understood what they were signing. Cattle tally records from a period of 3 years that showed consistent discrepancies between the numbers reported to the Territory Office and the numbers represented in private sale records. And most damning of all, a series of letters signed with the initials HV and addressed to a man named P. Langford, which letters contained in careful coded language instructions for the management of problems, legal problems, human problems, the kind of problems that became not problems when certain arrangements were made with certain officials. "Where did you get these?" Cole asked. Harriet looked at him with the particular serenity of a woman who has spent a lifetime receiving confidential correspondence. "People forget," she said, "that the person who carries the mail learns things. And people also forget things sometimes in envelopes, or they die before they can collect what they left for safekeeping." She folded her hands on the table. "I have been keeping things safe for a long time. I have been waiting for someone to come and receive them." There was a silence around the table. Cole looked at the documents. He looked at Ellie, who was sitting very straight in her chair, reading each piece of paper as it was laid down with the focused attention of someone who understood accounting and was finding everything she was looking at legible and damning. He looked at Gus, who was looking at the table in the way of a man doing penance. "We need two more things," Cole said. "We need to send a telegram to Fort Stanton, and we need a photographer." "My cousin in Roswell has a camera," one of the ranchers said. "He photographs for the land office." "Can he be trusted?" The man considered. "He hates Voss." "Good enough," Cole said. He looked at Ellie. She looked back. "The photograph," he said quietly. She understood what he meant. Not the documents, the photograph of the brand on her skin, the thing that Voss had done to mark her as property, as a warning, as something to be ashamed of, and the thing that would now become the most powerful piece of evidence they had, because a document could be called a forgery, testimony could be called a lie, but a brand burned into a woman's living skin was a fact that existed beyond argument. She would have to allow it. She would have to sit in front of a camera and allow someone to point it at the most private and painful mark on her body and capture it permanently. She had been humiliated by that brand since the moment it was put there. She had spent her first 24 hours of consciousness after the frame doing everything she could to avoid letting Cole look at it. She nodded. "All right," she said. Cole looked at her for a moment. There was something in his expression she could not quite read. Not pity, not admiration, exactly. Something more complicated. More. "You're sure?" "If I change my mind, I'll tell you," she said. "Don't ask me again." He didn't. Gus's cousin rode out the next morning and returned with a man named Theodore, who arrived with his camera packed in a wooden case, and the air of someone who had been told enough to know that this was serious and who had decided that being serious was the correct response. Clara was sent to the kitchen garden again and given an explicit instruction not to come inside for 1 hour, which she received with the same profound skepticism as before and honored with more faithfulness than anyone expected. Cole stood at the window with his back to the room. He stood there and looked at the mountains and listened to Theodore's quiet professional murmurings and Ellie's brief even responses and the soft clunk of the camera equipment, and he did not turn around. The afternoon light came through the window, and he could see August at the fence post in his peripheral vision, tail switching at flies, entirely unconcerned with the weight of human things. Behind him, Ellie said, "You can turn around if you want." He turned. She was sitting in the chair, Theodore packing up his equipment to one side, and she had his coat back around her hips, and she was looking at Cole with an expression that was tired and determined, and something else, something that was slightly raw in the way of a person who has done a hard thing and come out the other side of it into uncertain air. "That took courage," he said. "It was just a photograph." "No, it wasn't." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked away and out the window at the mountains. "I keep thinking about what Voss was trying to do," she said, "when he put that mark on me. He was trying to make it something I would never stop being ashamed of, something I would never show anyone, something that would hold me the way those ropes held me with my own shame instead of hemp." She paused. "I think that's worse actually than the ropes. The ropes were just physical. He wanted the mark to be something I carried." Cole crossed the room and stood near her, close enough to be present, far enough to give her the space she wasn't asking for, but probably needed. "You're not carrying it the way he intended," he said. "I know." She looked up at him. "I know that now. I didn't the first hour. The first hour, all I could think was that no one would ever look at me again and see anything except that." She held his gaze. "You were the first person who looked at me after." He didn't say anything. "You looked away," she said, "when I asked you to. Every time." "You asked me to," he said. "A lot of men wouldn't have." He was quiet for a moment. "I know what it is to have people look at you and only see what was done to you," he said. "After the war, after some of the things that happened, people would look at me and see the war and the things I had done in it and the things I had failed to do, and I would watch them deciding what I was from the outside in without asking." He looked at the window. "I did not want to be another person who did that to someone." She was quiet for a long moment. "Tell me the rest of the plan," she said. He told her. The telegram to Fort Stanton went out under Gus's name, and Cole's citing specific instances of land fraud, cattle theft, and the intimidation and branding of a witness, and requesting that an officer be sent to receive sworn statements and evidence. The officer who responded, a Lieutenant Carey Young, rigidly correct, clearly, ambitious enough to want to make something of what he was being offered, arrived 4 days later and spent 6 hours with Harriet's documents and Theodore's photographs and the sworn statements of the ranchers and Gus and Cole and Ellie. He left with everything in a document case. He said within the week. That gave them 7 days. 7 days in which Voss, still the most powerful man in Lincoln County, still the man the sheriff took his orders from, still the man who could make problems disappear. Cole spent most of those 7 days doing things that felt like waiting, but were actually preparation. Talking to ranchers, quietly identifying who in Lincoln itself could be trusted and who could not, and who was afraid but would show up if someone else showed up first. He rode into Lincoln twice to take the measure of it. The second time, Ellie came with him. Voss's man Dick saw them in the street, and his eyes went flat and still. He did not approach. He watched them from across the street until they walked into the general store, and then Cole had no doubt that Voss knew within the hour that Eleanor Cross was still alive and had been seen in Lincoln in the company of someone Dix did not recognize. "He'll know soon," Ellie said on the ride back. "He already knows," Cole said. "He's been knowing. He's been waiting to see what we do." "And what do we do?" "Exactly what we planned," but he said. "We don't change the plan because he's watching. If we change the plan because he's watching, we've already lost." She rode beside him in silence for a while. The territory had begun to cool toward fall. The mornings had a bite to them now, and the light had gone from the brutal white of summer to something warmer and more slanted that made the grass glow gold. "I keep thinking about what I'll say," she said, "when we're standing in front of everyone." "What have you come up with?" "Nothing that sounds right yet." She paused. "Every time I practice it in my head, it comes out either too angry or too small. I want it to be true. I want it to just sound true." "It will," he said, "when the time comes." "You don't know that." "No," he said, "but I know you, which is more useful than certainty." She looked at him sideways. He was watching the trail ahead, face unreadable, and she had learned in the past several days that his unreadable expression was not absence. It was attention turned inward, thought and progress. She had also learned that he was not a man who said things he did not mean. She looked back at the trail. "Gus," she said, "have you decided what you're going to do about Gus?" "Already done," Cole said. "You forgave him." "I don't know if forgive is the right word." He considered it. He was afraid. He made the wrong choice because he was afraid. He has been living with that for 9 years. He produced the evidence when it mattered. He was quiet for a moment. "I've made wrong choices out of fear. I'm not in a position to withhold forgiveness from someone for a thing I understand." Ellie thought about that for the rest of the ride. That evening, sitting on the porch of Gus's ranch while Clara slept inside and the mountains turned purple, in the last of the light, she asked Cole the question she had been working up to for several days. "What do you do after this?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "I don't know," he said finally. "I've been not anywhere in particular for a while." "Is that how you'd describe it?" "It's accurate." She looked at the mountains. "My station needs work," she said. "The east stall has a bad sag in the roof. I've needed someone to look at it for months." He said nothing. "That's not an invitation," she said. "I'm just noting it." "I know," he said. "I just thought you should know," she said. The mountains went darker. The first stars appeared. Somewhere inside, Clara made a small sound in her sleep and was quiet again. Cole looked at the stars. The roof over the east stall, he said. Yes, that's a real problem. It is, she said. Someone should look at it. I think so, she said. Neither of them said anything else for a while, but neither of them went inside either. The morning Ellie Cross walked back into Lincoln, New Mexico territory, the sky was the color of old bone and the wind was coming from the north. She had chosen the day herself. She had chosen the time mid-morning when the street would be busy, when the people who needed to see would be present to see. She had chosen what she was going to want, or as much of it as could be chosen in advance. The rest she was going to have to find in the moment, the way you found footing on uncertain ground, one step at a time, wait forward, trust that the earth will be there. Cole rode on her left, Gus rode on her right. Behind them in twos and threes came the others. The rancher's Harriet Burke on a mule that she rode with the serene authority of a woman who had been riding mules longer than most of the men present had been alive, and four more people she had not met until the past week who had been waiting in their own ways for exactly this. 14 people in total. Harlan Voss was standing in front of his office when they rode in. He had known they were coming. Of course he had. He had known for days, probably. Voss was not a stupid man, and he had sources throughout the county, and Cole had made no secret of their preparations beyond the specific timing. The element of surprise had never been the point. The point was the evidence in the witnesses and the officer from Fort Stanton who had arrived in Lincoln 2 days prior and was currently waiting in the hotel with a document case and a set of handcuffs. Voss watched them come down the main street. He was a big man, 60 or so, with a face that had started as handsome and been reworked by decades of sun and weather, and the particular look of a man who had been certain of his own rightness for so long that certainty had become his whole face. He had 3 men with him, none of them dicks, she noticed, and filed that away. And he stood with his arms at his sides and watched them come with the expression of someone who has not yet decided whether to be afraid. The street had stopped moving. People came out of storefronts, came out of the hotel, the saloon, the mercantile. Word moved the way it always moved in a small town, faster than logic ahead of explanation. By the time Cole and Ellie and the others pulled up in front of Voss's office, there were 40, maybe 50 people on the street, and more appearing from side alleys and back routes. Voss looked at Ellie. "Mrs. Cross," he said. His voice was even, almost pleasant. "I had heard you were going to put in an appearance. I confess I'm surprised you went to all this trouble." He gestured at the people behind her with something that was almost paternalistic. "Whatever you think you have, I assure you." "I'm not here to assure you of anything," Ellie said. Her voice came out even, steady. She had been afraid it would shake, had been afraid of that since she woke up that morning, had said as much to Cole over coffee in the gray pre-dawn, and he had told her that her voice shaking was not the same as her being wrong, and that the people listening to her would know the difference. She had not expected to believe him. But standing here now in the open air, with the town watching, her voice came out even, and she thought, all right then. "I'm here to say something I should have said 3 years ago," she said. "And I'm going to say it where everyone can hear it because Harlan Voss has been depending for a very long time on the fact that people in this county are afraid to speak in front of each other." Voss's expression tightened slightly, just slightly. "3 years ago," Ellie said, "my husband Aaron Cross died. You were told it was a fall from a horse. Aaron Cross had been riding horses his whole life and had never fallen once. He died 2 days after a man named Robert Whitaker came to our station with a ledger that showed something Harlan Voss could not afford to have known." She looked at the crowd, not at Voss. Robert Whitaker had a small cattle operation in this county. He ran honest cattle with an honest brand. Those cattle are now in Harlan Voss's herds. The brand has been burned over. I know this because I watched it happen before sunrise in my east pasture 3 weeks ago, and I know what the original brand looked like because it was burned into my skin when Voss's men tied me to a frame in the Lincoln Prairie to make sure I did not say what I had seen. The street was very quiet. Ellie turned. She looked at Cole, and Cole looked at her, and the question in her eyes was simple. "Are you ready?" He nodded once. She turned back to the crowd. "I have something to show you," she said. This was the hardest part. This was the part she had been dreading since the morning Theodore pointed the camera at her, and she had sat in that chair and told herself that what Voss intended as a shame could be made into a fact. Just a fact, a piece of evidence stripped of the power he had intended it to have. She reached down and she lifted the hem of her dress just enough to show the brand. The scar tissue healed now, but still visible. The 2 letters RB, still legible, still exactly what they were. The crowd looked. Some of them looked away quickly. Some of them did not. The ones who did not, the ones who held their eyes steady and looked at the fact of what had been done, those were the ones she was talking to. "This is Robert Whitaker's brand," she said. "Harlan Voss's men put it on me. They did it to remind me that I was property. They did it because Voss has been treating this county like his personal property for 15 years. She let her dress fall. "I have evidence, documents, a sworn statement from a man who was threatened into silence 9 years ago. I have a letter in my dead husband's hand directing me to find a man named Whitaker if he died." She reached into her coat and produced the folded papers. "I have the testimony of ranchers who have had land and cattle taken from them by legal mechanisms that were not legal at all." She looked at Voss. "And I have a federal officer from Fort Stanton who has reviewed all of it and has additional questions for you." Voss stared at her for just a moment. Just a moment, she saw something cross his face that was not rage, not contempt, not the calculation she expected. It was something closer to fear, and underneath the fear, something she had not anticipated, something that looked like exhaustion. "You think this changes anything," he said. His voice was still controlled. "I have lawyers, I have contacts, I have—" "You had a county," Cole said. He had been silent until now, and the quietness of his voice after Ellie's clear, steady one drew every eye. "You had people who were afraid of you. You had a system that worked because nobody compared notes." He walked his horse a single step forward. "People are comparing notes now." Voss looked at him. Something shifted in Voss's expression, a recalibration. "Whitaker," he said, "you're Robert Whitaker's brother." "Yes," Cole said. "Then you should know something." Voss's voice had changed, too low or more deliberate, and there was something underneath it that Ellie could not identify. "Your brother didn't die because of me. Not the way you think." Cole went very still. "Your brother came to me," Voss said, "before he went to cross. He came to me, and he offered to sell me information about which of the other ranchers were planning to report the brand irregularities to the territory office. He wanted money to move on. He was tired of the territory, and he wanted to go somewhere else, and he was willing to sell what he knew to do it." The street was absolutely quiet. "I paid him," Voss said. "He took the money. And then he changed his mind, or something changed it for him, and he went to cross anyway with the ledger, and that was a problem." He paused. "I didn't order his death. I ordered him run off. What happened after that was one of my men acting without orders, and that man has not worked for me in 8 years." He looked at Cole with something that was almost direct. "Your brother was not entirely innocent. He was not entirely guilty either. He was a man who was in over his head and made a bad choice and then tried to make a better one. You might want to know that." Cole stared at Voss for a long time. The silence on the street stretched. Cole looked at Ellie. Ellie looked back at him. He could see it in his face, the hit of it, the way the information had landed. He had come here carrying a story about Robert, and the story had just been complicated in a way he could not unfeel. He looked back at Voss. "That changes what kind of man you are," he said. Voss blinked. "You stole land," Cole said. "You forged brands. You threatened people into silence. You had a doctor killed." His voice was still quiet. "You burned your mark into a woman's skin and left her tied to a frame in the September heat to die." He paused. "Robert made a bad choice. He spent the rest of his short life trying to correct it. You just told me my brother died trying to do right after a moment when he was wrong." He looked at Voss steadily. "That's not the story you thought you were telling me, I think." Voss opened his mouth. He closed it again. Lieutenant Carey came out of the hotel. He walked across the street with the deliberate stride of a man who has been waiting for his cue and is aware that people are watching him, and he had the document case under his arm and the handcuffs on his belt and the expression of someone who has been given clear authority and intends to use it correctly. "Harlan Voss," he said, "I have questions for you regarding certain land transactions and cattle operations in Lincoln County. You have the right to legal counsel. I would advise you to exercise it." He looked at Voss's 3 men. "Gentlemen, please step aside." Voss's men looked at the crowd at 14 people who had ridden in together, at 40 more, who were standing in the street watching at the federal officer with the document case, and they stepped aside. Voss looked at Ellie one last time. She met his gaze. She did not look away. He was led into the hotel. The street exhaled. There was no celebration. This surprised some people. The ranchers particularly had expected something celebratory, some moment of collective release. What happened instead was quieter and more complicated. People talked in small groups on the street. Some of them went to find Harriet Burke and ask her questions about the documents they had heard described. One of the ranchers rode immediately for the land office to find out what needed to be done to reclaim a parcel his family had signed away without understanding what they were signing. Ellie sat on a bench in front of the general store and let the commotion move around her. She felt, which was odd. She had expected to feel something decisive triumph or relief, or the specific lightness of a burden put down. What she felt instead was more complicated, something that was partly tired, partly sad, and partly something she did not have a word for yet. A quality of openness, as if a door had been opened for years in a wall she had thought was solid, and she had just now walked through it into air. She thought about Aaron. She thought about his voice explaining a river stone and the way he had looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't watching, and the piece of paper in his boot that she had carried for 3 years without knowing what to do with it. She thought about how he had gone to Whitaker's funeral and not told her why he was him, and how she had known he was sad and had not asked, and how both of them had been protecting each other from things that might have been easier to say. She missed him. She was going to miss him for a long time. She was also, for the first time in 3 years, beginning to feel that missing him and being in the world were not incompatible states. Cole came and sat beside her. He didn't say anything for a while. He had a small cut above his left eyebrow from where she didn't know, somewhere in the controlled chaos of the past hour, and his hat was slightly crooked, and he looked, she thought, like a man who had done a hard thing and come out the other side knowing both more and less than he had known before. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Getting there," he said. "What Voss said about Robert." "I know." She waited. "I've been carrying a version of Robert for 3 years, Cole said. "The version where he was entirely right and I failed him. That was a useful version because it was simple." He looked at his hands. "The real version is harder. The real version is a man who made a mistake and tried to fix it and ran out of time." He paused. "I think I knew, actually. Some part of me knew he wasn't simple. The letters, even when they were good, there was something in them. Like he was performing being all right." He was quiet for a moment. "I miss him. That part isn't different." "No," she said. "He tried to do right in the end," Cole said. "That counts. I think that's what I'm going to hold on to." Ellie nodded. They sat on the bench outside the general store in Lincoln, New Mexico territory in the cooling September air. And around them, the town went on being complicated in all the ways that towns are complicated, and the sun tracked its slow course across the sky. And eventually Cole said, "I should go see about the horses." "Yes," she said. Neither of them moved. "The east stall," he said. "The roof," she said. "Yes." "A bad sag, you said." "For months. That needs looking at before winter." "I've been saying that," she said. "You've been saying it to who?" "To myself, mostly." She looked at him sideways. "There haven't been a lot of candidates." Cole was quiet for a moment. In the street, someone laughed, a genuine laugh, startled and sudden, and it was such an unexpected sound after the intensity of the morning that both of them looked up. Clara Gus's granddaughter had appeared from somewhere and was engaged in what appeared to be a spirited argument with a chicken that had escaped from someone's coop. Cole watched the child with the chicken, and something shifted in his face. The careful watchfulness eased, slightly replaced by something that was not quite a smile, but was in the same neighborhood. "What does it look like?" he said. "Your station." Ellie thought about it. "Small," she said. "2 stalls, the barn, the main house. A kitchen garden that never quite does what I want it to do." The east pasture where she stopped. The east pasture, it runs down to a creek. In the evening, the light comes through the cottonwoods, and it turns everything gold for about 20 minutes. She paused. "It's a good 20 minutes. Cole nodded. "The horses are good," she continued. "I have 4. Good animals, well-tempered. The mare who was favoring her leg has come right, I think. I don't have anyone to check." "I know horses," Cole said. "I know," she said. He looked at the street. She looked at the street. "I've been not anywhere in particular for a while," he said. "I remember you saying that," she said. "I was thinking," he said slowly, "that there might be something to be said for somewhere particular. If the somewhere particular made sense." He paused. "And if the person already there was agreeable." Ellie Cross looked at Cole Whitaker. He was watching the street, not her, with the expression she had come to understand as thought in progress. He was not a man who rushed things. He was not a man who said more than he meant or meant more than he said. He was a man who had been not anywhere in particular for a long time, who had ridden across a stretch of country and found a woman tied to a frame and looked away when she asked him to, who had carried his brother's ghost for 3 years and was now beginning the slow work of putting it down somewhere respectful. He was the first person who had looked at her after, and he had looked at her face. "I'm agreeable," she said. He looked at her then. Just a glance, a brief, warm, sideways look, and then he looked back at the street. "All right," he said. Clara caught the chicken. 2 weeks later, the roof over the east stall was fixed. It had taken 3 days more than Cole had anticipated because when he got into the structure of it, he found that the sag was symptomatic of a larger problem with the main beam, which had been installed slightly wrong at the outset and had been compensating for that wrongness for years with increasing difficulty, the way things sometimes did. He was not sure what he had expected to find in himself working with his hands on a practical problem in a specific place. He had been not anywhere in particular for so long that being somewhere felt both smaller and larger than he had remembered. Smaller because the world had not changed its essential nature to welcome him. It was still the same world with the same demands. Larger because when the work was done and he walked out of the barn into the evening light, and Ellie was coming from the kitchen garden with her hands full of something she'd pulled from the earth, and the cottonwoods were doing exactly what she had described, turning gold in the last 20 minutes of sun, it was larger. It was almost embarrassingly large. He told himself he was staying for the horses. There was always something to do with the horses. He and Ellie moved around the station in the particular way of two people who had been through something large together and were now negotiating what the smaller scale of ordinary days looked like. It was not seamless. There were moments of too much formality, brief retreats to safety, when something got too close to the edge of what they were not yet saying. There were evenings on the porch that went long and quiet in ways that were comfortable, and other evenings that went long and quiet in ways that were not quite. They were careful with each other. This was not the same as being distant. The photographer's prints arrived from Roswell, and Cole went to Ellie with them. She looked at them for a long time without speaking. The brand documented, the bruises documented. Everything Voss had done made into a fact that could travel. "They'll be needed for the hearing," he said. "I know." She set them down. "I'm glad they exist. I just need a moment to look at them and remember that they're evidence, not that they're evidence." She straightened. "All right." They were in fact needed. The hearing in Santa Fe ran for 2 weeks and required Ellie's testimony and Cole's testimony and Gus's testimony and the testimony of 3 ranchers in the entire inventory of Harriet Burke's document collection. The judge was a man from Virginia who had no prior connection to Lincoln County and approached the evidence with the focused neutrality of someone who found the whole affair deeply interesting from a legal standpoint. Voss had lawyers, very good lawyers. Harriet Burke's documents were very good evidence. The lawyers did not prevail. Harlan Voss was convicted on 4 counts of land fraud, 2 counts of cattle theft with organized enterprise, 1 count of conspiracy in the death of Aaron Cross, and 1 count of assault with bodily harm regarding Eleanor Cross. His associate in the Peter Langford letters was indicted separately. The judge fined him substantially and sentenced him to 7 years in the territorial prison. 7 years was not enough for Aaron. Ellie knew this. She had made her peace with what the law could offer and what it could not, and she had decided that peace, the internal kind, the private kind, was not going to arrive through a judge's sentence in any case. It was going to have to be built by hand the way most of the worthwhile things in her life had been built. She was already building it. On the ride back from Santa Fe, 3 days of easy territory, the sky opening up into October blue, Cole rode beside her rather than slightly behind, which she noticed but did not comment on. He had been making small adjustments like this for weeks. Small calibrations in their spatial relationship, in the way he moved around the station, in the way he spoke to her when something difficult arose. Not pressing, not retreating either. "What will you do?" she said about Robert's cattle. He had been thinking about this since the hearing. She knew he had the same way she was learning to know his silences. "The territory says I'm the next of kin," he said. "The land is forfeit, the estate dissolved years ago. But there may be some claim for the cattle if there's any record of how many Voss took." He shrugged slightly. "It's not what I came here for. It's just something that needs settling." "Robert would have liked you to settle it," she said. Cole was quiet for a moment. Probably he was practical about some things. He paused. "He would have liked you, I think. He liked people who kept accounts and didn't lie about the numbers." Ellie smiled. It was the first time he had spoken about Robert in a way that was about who Robert was rather than what had happened to him, and she understood this as something. Aaron was terrible at accounts, she said. Brilliant doctor, catastrophic bookkeeper. I handled the numbers because if I left it to him, we would have been bankrupt within a year. She paused. He knew this about himself and found it hilarious. Cole looked at her sideways. You don't talk about him much. I think about him constantly, she said. It's been hard. Talking means finishing sentences about someone who isn't here to hear them. She paused. It gets easier or different. I'm not sure they're the same thing. Different, Cole said. She glanced at him. Things get different, he said. You learn to carry them differently. Whether that's easier depends on the day. You sound like you know. I've lost people, he said simply. And then after a moment, I don't want to lose more. She held his gaze for a count of 3. Then she looked forward at the trail ahead, at the cottonwood line in the distance that meant they were getting close to home. Home. She had been using that word again without thinking about it, which was itself something. You won't, she said. It was quiet. He did not push for more than she had offered, and she did not offer more than she was ready to give. And they rode together through the October light, and neither of them said anything else. And the silence was the kind that does not need filling, because what is already in it is enough. The first frost came in late October. Cole found it on the grass when he came out of the barn in the morning and stood in it for a minute looking at the mountains going pink in the east and thought about what kind of man he was. The question occurred to him less often these days, which he suspected was progress. He went inside. Ellie was already at the stove, coffee on biscuits not yet in the pan, her hair pinned up in the way she did it in the mornings, which was different from the way she wore it in the afternoon, and still different from the way she wore it in the evenings when she stopped bothering. He had memorized these variations without meaning to, the way you memorize the particular habits of a place you intended to stay. He got 2 cups and set them on the table and sat down. She brought the coffee and sat across from him. They looked at each other across the table. Frost, he said. I know, she said. I checked the east stall. The repair is holding. Good, he said. You did a good job, she said. Thank you, he said. The coffee was good. The frost was on the grass outside and the mountains were going from pink to gold. And inside the kitchen it was warm, and something that had been moving towards something for weeks arrived quietly in that moment. Without ceremony, like a traveler who had been on the road a long time, finally reaching a destination they had not been entirely sure was real. Cole looked at Ellie. She was looking back at him. He reached across the table and turned his hand over open on the tabletop. Not reaching for her. Just putting his hand there open as an invitation that she could answer or not answer as she saw fit. She looked at his hand for a moment. Then she put hers in it. Just that. Just her hand in his. The frost outside, the coffee between them. The mountains going gold in the window, and 2 people who had come a long way, not from the same direction, not by the same roads, both of them carrying what the road had given them, arriving at the same table. Neither of them spoke. After a while, Ellie looked out the window at the mountains. You know what I keep thinking about, she said. What? That first morning. When you came up on that frame. She looked at him. You didn't know me at all. You didn't know anything about what had happened or why. And you still stopped. August stopped, he said. I was following the horse. She smiled. August has good judgment. Excellent judgment, he agreed. Better than mine on most days. She looked at their hands on the table. I keep thinking, she said more slowly, that there was no reason for it to go the way it did. You could have kept riding. Most people would have kept riding. And I would have, she stopped. I would have died out there thinking I was nothing more than what they had made me. Cole's hand closed gently around hers. Not pressing, just present. You were never what they made you, he said. I know that now. She met his eyes, but knowing it in here, she touched her chest. Took someone else saying it first. That's not a weakness, I think. I think that's just how people work. We need someone to see us first before we can see ourselves. Cole looked at her. You saw me too, he said quietly. You and your piece of paper in Aaron's boot and the question you couldn't put down for 3 years. You saw that something was wrong and you kept the knowledge of it alive when it would have been easier to let it die. He paused. That's not nothing. That was what made any of this possible. She held his gaze. We saw each other, she said. Yes, he said. Outside, the frost was melting in the early sun, and the east pasture was beginning to catch the light, and the cottonwoods along the creek were doing the thing they did in the mornings, leafless now, but still beautiful, the silver bark going bright in the slanted October gold. In the barn, August moved and the stall boards creaked in the familiar way of a horse expressing general well-being. Ellie looked at the window and then back at the man across the table. She thought about a wooden frame in the Lincoln Prairie and a pair of tired blue eyes under a battered hat brim, and the first time she had told him not to look there, and the way he had turned his face away without argument or judgment. She thought about everything that had happened between that moment and this one. The creek, the kitchen table, the mountains turning purple in the evening, the hearing room in Santa Fe, the October frost. She thought about her husband, who had looked at river stones and kept terrible accounts, and died 50 yards from his own front door trying to do the right thing. She thought about Robert Whitaker, who had been wrong, and then tried to be right and had not had enough time. She thought about the people who were gone and the space they left, and the fact that living in that space, genuinely living in it, rather than just keeping the lights on, was its own kind of honoring them. "Cole," she said. "Yes," he said. "Stay," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. His thumb moved slightly across the back of her hand, just once, barely there. A motion so small that anyone watching might have missed it. "All right," he said. He said it simply. He said it the way he said most things, without ornament, without excess, as the statement of a fact that he had decided was true. She had learned to hear this in him. She trusted the way he spoke more than the way most people performed. She looked back out at the mountains. The day had properly arrived. The frost was gone. The east pasture was catching full light and turning gold in the way she had described to him weeks ago on a bench in Lincoln, the good 20 minutes, the cottonwoods, the particular quality of October morning. She had promised him this view, and here it was. Neither of them said anything else for a while. They didn't need to. This isn't a story about a frame in the prairie or a federal hearing in Santa Fe, or even a man who stopped when every road gave him a reason to keep going. It's a story about what happens when someone sees you. Really sees you past everything that has been done to you and everything you have been told you are and what you are able to become once you have been seen. When they tell you not to look, they are always protecting something they cannot afford to have seen. Look anyway. If this story moves something in you, I hope you'll tap like and subscribe so you don't miss the next ride. And tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are? What are you listening on? Who are you thinking about right now? Because your story matters too. We'll see you on the next one.